Welcome. Enjoy watching.
Road without her.
The highway hissed beneath his tires like a whisper of warning. Albuquerque blinked into view under the desert moon, its neon edges flickering like a mirage. Brad's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't plan to stop, not really, but the gas tank begged otherwise. At 1:17 a.m., the world was silent save for the low hum of halogen and distant coyotes. The gas station was half-lit, perched on the edge of nothing. It felt like a place where things began, or ended. She was standing by the vending machines, framed by flickering red and blue. Tanned legs and dusty boots, a jean jacket clinging to a silhouette that looked like it didn't belong here. Her name was Tara. Or so she said. She smiled like she knew how the night would go before he did. Brad was tired, road-worn, with just enough loneliness to let his guard down. They talked. Laughed. She mentioned a nearby motel with working AC and decent coffee. He didn't think twice. Room 109 smelled like cheap perfume and bleach. She poured whiskey into plastic cups and asked him about his road trip. He told her bits. Not everything. She didn't need to know about the last town, or why he was driving alone. She listened like someone who collected stories more than people. When she leaned in, her lips tasted like cinnamon and smoke. He fell asleep with her hair on his chest, the hum of the AC masking the silence behind her eyes. Morning hit hard. She was gone. So was his wallet. And phone. And the key to his locked duffel bag, where 10 grand in poker winnings had been tucked inside a stitched lining. Brad sat on the edge of the bed, jaw tight, heart slow. His reflection in the cracked mirror didn't blink. But he didn't curse. Didn't punch the wall. Instead, he reached for the whiskey bottle, tilted it, empty. A smile tugged at his lip. She'd made a mistake. She thought he was just some tired drifter. She didn't know Brad remembered everything, license plate, the motel clerk's stutter, the logo on her lighter. She thought she vanished. But Brad was already tracking her down. The motel clerk stammered when Brad asked about her. She checked out early. Like real early. Left with 2 guys. Pickup truck. Texas plates. Brad nodded, thanked him, and left a 20 on the counter, not for the info, but to keep the guy quiet. Outside, the morning heat was already curling the edges of the day. He slid back into his car, dust still clinging to the windows. He didn't bother with the GPS. He knew where she'd gone. South Valley. Cheap motels, pawn shops, places that turned 10 grand into shadows. Brad's hand hovered over the glove box. Inside, another phone. A burner. Not flashy. Prepaid. Untraceable. He'd used it before for situations exactly like this. He checked the app he installed months ago, the one meant to track certain numbers. Tara's number had pinged once, briefly. A motel called Cielo Azul. He drove without music. Just the wind and the hum of his engine, his mind assembling pieces. Her lighter had a faded Los Alamos bail bonds sticker. One of the guys at the table in Flagstaff mentioned it. Tara hadn't noticed that he was watching her hands when she picked up his whiskey. He saw the switch. The way she tilted the glass to block her face from the hallway camera. She was smooth. But he was patient. Cielo Azul looked abandoned from the street. But behind the facade was life, cars idling, blinds shifting. Brad parked around back. Walked in like he'd done it 100 times. Room 6A had voices, 2 men, 1 woman, all arguing. Someone mentioned too hot and laying low. Then her voice, cool, sharp, in control. He knocked. Silence. Room service, he said, amused. A click. The chain slid back. The man who opened the door barely had time to register the punch. Brad moved fast. Clean. Tactical. He stepped over the body as the second guy lunged. A twist, a knee, a crash. Then her. Tara backed away like she saw a ghost. Brad, what the hell? He shut the door behind him. I'm not here for the money, he said, low. She blinked. Then what? Brad smiled, cold and steady. I'm here for the lesson. Tara's eyes darted to the duffel bag sitting by the window, half-zipped. Money still inside. Sloppy. She wasn't usually sloppy. That's how Brad knew she didn't expect him to show up, she'd already moved on to the next phase. Fence it. Disappear. Start fresh. But Brad wasn't just a pit stop. He was a consequence. You came all this way to teach me something, she scoffed, folding her arms. That's rich. He stepped forward, unfazed. No, you came all this way. You brought me here, remember? The second guy groaned on the floor, trying to crawl. Brad nudged him aside with his boot, never taking his eyes off Tara. You picked the wrong mark. I didn't lose the money. I let it ride. You just became the jackpot. Tara laughed, but it was thinner now. So what, you gonna beat me up? Drag me back to your little poker circle? Brad leaned in, voice level. No. I'm gonna take it back, and leave you exactly how I found you, on the side of the road, selling stories and smoke. He reached for the duffel. Unzipped it fully. Counted a few stacks. Still all there. You didn't touch it, he asked. She shrugged. Wanted to make sure it was real first. You think I'm stupid? I think you're bored, he said, straightening. And boredom makes people reckless. Brad pulled a phone from his pocket, the burner she didn't know he had. Flipped it open. Pressed play. Tara's voice crackled through, he's got cash. It's in a lined bag. I'll get him drunk. You get the room key. Her face drained. He smiled. Motel clerk owed me a favor. Said you made a call from the front desk. She lunged for him. He sidestepped, smooth as a whisper, and she crashed into the nightstand. Glass shattered. The second guy whimpered. Brad knelt beside her, gentle but unshakable. Next time, Tara, bet your marks better. He stood, tossed a wad of cash at the other man. For your hospital bill. Then he walked out the door, duffel in hand, leaving only silence behind him. The hallway was dim, buzzing with the kind of yellow light that made everything look sick. Brad didn't rush. He zipped the duffel tight, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out the front like a man leaving church, calm, reverent, done with it all. He felt the heat crawl up from the pavement, dry and relentless, but he welcomed it. It was honest. Albuquerque didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. Not like her. He slid into the car, started the engine, and didn't look back. But at the red light on Avenida Cesar Chavez, he caught his reflection in the rearview, eyes darker than last night, face set in stone. Not angry. Just done. He didn't need revenge. He got what he came for, the truth. That was always more useful than payback. But something tugged at him. Not guilt. Not grief. Curiosity. Tara was good. Really good. Maybe better than she knew. But there was a desperation in her game, timing was too tight, her exit too loose. She was running from something. Or toward it. Did it matter? Maybe. He took a left instead of the freeway. Headed toward the strip of pawn shops behind San Mateo. He wasn't chasing her. He was looking for the pattern. People like her didn't stop. They repeated. New names. Same moves. At the third shop, he struck gold. Security footage. A clear shot. Tara, the second guy, limping, and a third man, new. Taller, dressed clean. Watching her with the kind of ownership Brad recognized instantly. She wasn't running alone. She was working under someone. A voice in Brad's head whispered, "This goes deeper." He stared at the grainy image of the tall man. His hand rested on Tara's lower back like a claim. She flinched. Not fear. Disgust. Just enough to make Brad pause. He walked out of the shop and leaned against the car, sun glaring off the windshield. It wasn't about the money anymore. Not for her. And now, not for him either. Brad lit a cigarette. Took a long drag. Then he opened his phone again, and started digging. There was another game on the table. And this time, Brad was playing for keeps. By sundown, Brad was in the heart of the valley, parked outside a dive bar called the Cactus Tap. The kind of place where stories died quietly over cheap beer. Inside, the air was thick with sweat, smoke, and the low drone of a jukebox stuck on old country heartbreaks. He wasn't here for the music. He'd traced the tall guy, name was Ray Voss. Ex-military. Ran crews out of Texas, but Albuquerque was his new playground. Word was, Ray used people like Tara, pretty, desperate, clever enough to pull off the job, not smart enough to walk away before the last turn. Brad stepped through the door like he belonged. No one noticed, except one. In the far booth, Tara sat alone, arms crossed, jaw clenched. She wasn't sipping anything. She looked like she hadn't blinked in an hour. And for the first time, Brad saw it. Not the grifter. Not the thief. The prisoner. She looked up. Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. "You're persistent," she muttered, as he slid into the booth across from her. "You're sloppy," he said. "Ray's gonna kill you when you stop being useful." Tara's mask cracked for just a second. A flicker of something raw. "I didn't know what he was until it was too late," she whispered. "Thought it was just a crew. Just a few hits. Then I saw what he did to a girl who got curious." Brad leaned forward. "You're curious too." "Not anymore," she said, though her voice didn't quite believe it. He reached into his pocket. Pulled out a photo, still from the pawn shop camera. Ray's hand on her back. Her eyes, looking away. "He owns you." "No," she said softly. "He rents me." A beat. "I can help you disappear," Brad said. "But I need something first." She stared at him, lips tight. "Why help me?" Brad didn't answer right away. He didn't know yet. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was justice. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because Brad had spent years playing games with people like Ray. And he was done folding early. Tara took a breath. "All right. Let's burn him down." They met in silence behind the bar, where the dumpsters stank of old beer and betrayal. The desert air was cooler now, but it carried tension like static. Brad handed her a burner phone and a folded piece of paper. Names. Times. Addresses. All linked to Ray Voss. "You've been busy," Tara murmured. "I don't like being played," he replied. Tara scanned the list, her fingers twitching like she wanted to run. But she didn't. "Not this time. Ray's planning something big," she said. 2 nights from now. Abandoned train yard off Gibson. High stakes buy. Cash, crypto, maybe guns. He's bringing the whole crew." Brad nodded. "Good. Then they'll all be in one place." She looked up. "You want to take them all down?" "No," he said. "I want to take him down. The rest will scatter once the head's cut." Tara hesitated. "He's dangerous." Brad gave a humorless smile. "So am I." They spent the next day planning. Maps, routines, burner messages, a fake tip to the feds. Brad had contacts, people who owed him or feared him enough to listen. Tara helped with the logistics, with codes and passphrase only someone inside Ray's circle would know. But there were quiet moments too. Over bad coffee and sleepless hours. "Why'd you really stop that night?" she asked him once, staring at the motel carpet. Brad exhaled slowly. "Didn't mean to. Just, felt like the road ended there." "It didn't," she said. "No," he agreed. "It started." On the night of the meet, they dressed like ghosts, dark, lean, quiet. Tara's hair was tied back, her eyes sharp again. Not scared anymore. They watched from the shadows as Ray's truck rolled in, his crew fanned out, and the buyer stepped forward. Cash exchanged. Laughter. No idea they were being watched. Then the sirens cut through the night like a scream. Red and blue flooded the yard. Chaos. Tara turned to Brad, heart pounding. "We did it." He watched Ray being shoved into a patrol car, his face twisted in confusion and rage. "We did it," Brad said. "But we're not done yet." Because Ray wasn't the top. He was just the middle. They didn't stop moving for 3 days. The bust at the train yard had made the local news, but Brad knew better than to celebrate. Guys like Ray didn't stay in custody long, not with the kind of leverage he held. The crew scattered like roaches, but the money trail didn't. Brad and Tara followed it east, through junk wire transfers and shell businesses in El Paso, and then west again, straight to a name that made Tara go pale. "Clint Rohn," she whispered, holding the printout like it burned. "He's the one Ray answered to. Always said he was just the cleaner. Clint made the messes." Brad stared at the photo. White hair, suit too clean for a man that dirty. A face you trust, even as he emptied your account and smiled doing it. Brad had heard rumors about Clint Rohn, high-level fixer with law enforcement ties, contracts on both sides of the border. And ghosts. A lot of them. Tara looked up. "If we go after him, we don't walk away." "We don't have to walk," Brad said. "We just need to hit him where he's weakest." His weakness wasn't money. It was reputation. They tracked Clint to a resort outside Santa Fe. Private. Guarded. But no fortress is perfect. Brad used the same skills that had made him a threat at poker tables, reading tells, finding cracks, knowing when to bluff and when to strike. Tara got close to Clint's assistant, sweet-talked him into slipping up. One name. One code. Enough to breach the firewall. Inside Clint's system, they found everything. Offshore accounts. Blackmail files. Dealings with law enforcement. And a hidden ledger of payouts. One name stood out, Detective Langston. The same name listed on Ray Voss's arrest report. "They let him out," Tara said, voice tight. Brad nodded. "They always do. If they're valuable enough. They could have sold the files. Disappeared. But Brad knew that wouldn't fix it. He didn't want out. He wanted it burned down. He scheduled a timed upload. 10 minutes from now, Clint's secrets would flood every inbox from Homeland Security to Interpol. Tara watched the screen tick down. "After this," she said, "we'll be hunted." Brad lit a match, smiled at the flame. "Then let's give them a reason." The file dropped like a bomb. Emails, documents, wire logs, every dirty secret Clint Rohn had buried was now public. Homeland. DOJ. Foreign intelligence. Even a few journalists with axes to grind. Phones started ringing before the countdown hit 0. Sirens followed. Men in suits who thought they were gods suddenly found their names on the wrong end of an evidence chain. Brad and Tara didn't stay to watch it unfold. By the time Clint's compound was raided, they were already crossing the border, on foot, under moonlight, moving through the Sonoran scrub like shadows. No phones. No noise. Just breath and dirt and the kind of silence that tastes like survival. In a rundown cantina south of the line, Brad finally exhaled. He poured 2 shots of mezcal, pushed one toward her. 2 endings, he said. Tara looked at the glass, then at him. Or beginnings. They drank. Her fingers trembled as she set the glass down. I never thought I'd get away from him. You didn't, Brad said. You beat him. She smiled, tired and real. With you. Brad leaned back. You saved yourself. I just gave you a second to breathe. They didn't say much after that. The adrenaline was fading, and with it came the weight. Tara curled into a battered booth, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly overhead. Brad sat by the door, ever the lookout, always half in and half out of every moment. You ever stop running? She asked softly. He thought about it. Only when there's nothing left to chase. Is that where we are now? He turned to her. No. I think we just finally started chasing the right thing. Outside, the desert was alive with wind and coyotes and a sky so wide it made your past feel small. They didn't have plans. They had each other. And for once, that felt like enough. In the morning, they'd disappear again. Change names, vanish into some coastline or canyon. But tonight, they existed. Not as grifters. Not as fugitives. As people who took the worst the world had to offer, and flipped it on its head. And walked away free. The sun cracked over the desert like a blade. Light spilled across the gravel, too bright for the hour. Brad stood at the edge of the cantina, coffee in one hand, the road in his eyes. Tara was inside. Quiet. Packed. Ready to disappear. He wasn't sure why he lingered, until he heard the engine. A truck. Dented. No plates. Symbol sprayed in black. Ray Voss stepped out slow, like pain had settled into his bones. Bruises still fresh. One eye swollen. But he smiled. You always finish what you start, Brad. Brad stayed still. Only when it matters. Ray's gaze slid past him. She's in there. You don't get to talk about her. Ray laughed, low and tired. You think she's safe now? Think you are. Brad's hand brushed his side, but he didn't reach for the gun yet. She burned Clint, Ray said. Made enemies too big to chase. She just doesn't know it yet. She knows. Ray stepped forward. You gonna shoot me in broad daylight? Brad didn't blink. You reach, you bleed. For a second, Ray just stared. Then his hand twitched toward his coat. Brad's pistol was already raised. No shout. No warning. Ray froze. You're out of second chances, Brad said. You crawl back into your hole and stay there. Next time, I don't hesitate. Ray's mouth curled. But he lowered his hand. You're not built for this. Brad stepped closer. Calm. Certain. You still think this is a game. He watched Ray get back in the truck and drive away, slower than he came. No threats. No plan. Just the long road behind him. Inside, Tara watched from the shadows. It's over, she asked. Brad holstered the pistol. No, he said. But we're ahead. She nodded once. Nothing else needed saying. They walked out together. No names. No maps. Just motion. The past behind them. The road in front. And no one left to chase.
Road without her.